The story begins with our MC, Isaac von Goethe, receiving gifts from the maids and workers for becoming the youngest person recommended to enter the Royal Academy at just 10 years old. Isaac is considered to be a genius, thanks to all the things he's been able to achieve in just a little time. Celebrations rock the house so much that the nanny even bakes Isaac all of his favorite snacks. Even the closest maid to Isaac, Hans, brought him a lot of stuff to thank him for helping his son when he was sick. Even Isaac's younger brother, Jonas, was there to play him a song with his lute. Everything was going so well until Isaac screamed out of his dream in horror. Surprisingly, it is now an older Isaac who is just remembering the good old times that he had. The room where he wakes up has no sense of nobility and looks more like a slum. Just then, one of his aides, Lucas, enters the room, and from how Isaac is sitting and panting, he realizes that he must have had a bad dream. Isaac admits that he did, revealing that he dreamt about the past, and Lucas asks him how far into the past. Isaac mentions that it was about 20 years in the past, and Lucas urges him to forget about the past and enjoy the fresh cheese he just made him. Lucas lets him know that once he is done, they are going to do the sword training that they missed the day before. To know what happened, the story takes a quick glance into the past when Isaac was 10 years old and was just a month away from entering the Royal Academy. After the celebrations, he suddenly caught a strange flu, and the flu lasted for 3 months. When he showed no signs that he was going to recover, his father, Count Goethe, called for a scholar from the magic tower. The scholar informs his father that Isaac is suffering from a special constitution. Basically, every living being has its own innate mana vessel, and mana moves at a speed suitable for the size of that vessel. However, Isaac's mana circulation is abnormal. Apparently, it is too fast and violent, and at the rate it is going, the vessels will shatter. Not long after this, the mana inside Isaac burst out like a broken dam, and the moment it collided with the external mana, it caused a mana explosion that led to the death of many people, while others also got injured. His mana would calm down, but repeatedly explode without warning, causing great anxiety among the people in the mansion. When the incident finally tore up Jonas's right arm, Isaac decided that he had had enough, and he begged his father to lock him up in a place where no one could reach so that he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone. It turns out that he was 15 when he requested to be locked up, and he has been there ever since. Now, in the present, he sees Lucas coughing, but it wasn't a dry cough because he coughed up blood. The moment Isaac sees this, he realizes that Lucas is suffering from mana poisoning, and this is because he has stayed by his side for too long. Isaac rushes over to Lucas to check on him, and he urges him to take a rest for at least a month, but Lucas refuses, saying there is no one who would attend to Isaac's needs if he decides to take a rest. In addition, he teases Isaac, reminding him that he has no friends. Isaac also teases him, saying he might just kick him out for insulting him, but Lucas assures him that he has nothing to worry about because he hasn't gotten harmed even once since he's been by his side. Lucas assures Isaac that he won't be able to find someone else like him, and Isaac points out the fact that Lucas might die any time if he is not careful. Isaac sends Lucas off, telling him that he needs to meditate, and Lucas leaves humbly, telling Isaac that it's been a pleasure being by his side. Later on, Isaac suffers one of his usual flashbacks, and in it, he sees Lucas's bloodied body after one of his mana explosions. Isaac jumps back to reality on his bed, and this is when it dawns on him that Lucas too is dead. Apparently, after he left when he coughed up blood, he didn't visit for over a year, and it was later that Isaac heard the news of his death through his father. That very day, there was another mana explosion, forcing him to completely lock his door. Isaac blames himself, saying he should have kept his distance and shouldn't have gotten attached to anyone. He believes that his close ones would have been safe if he had been a bit colder towards them. Isaac decided to adopt this method, and years later, even after refusing to eat, he realizes that he is still alive. The bread that is always dropped for him has grown mold, and when he finally decides to start eating again, he just dusts off the mold and bites down on the bread. At this point, he looks really old, even though he is still a middle-aged man. He dedicated himself to studying magic in a bid to overcome the condition that is affecting him. After reading for so long, he has learned everything from the books, and there is nothing more to know. What is left is inspiration and intuition. Several years later, Isaac finds a clue to overcome his fated problem. At this point, he is already 71 years old and has dedicated himself solely to research. Sometime later, he hears his brother's voice at the door, and he is shocked. Isaac speaks to him coldly, asking him why he is there. Jonas asks if he can come in, but Isaac refuses, telling Jonas to speak from where he is. The two then sit on opposite sides of the door and talk with their backs against it. Isaac asks Jonas how he's been, and Jonas replies that it is a really long story. Jonas asks Isaac if he knows that the day is the anniversary of their father's death. Isaac asks him how their father passed away, and he replies that it is a long story. He asks Isaac if he would like to hear it, and Isaac tells him to go ahead. Jonas gladly starts the story with what happened 30 years ago, which was a battle that broke out between the first and second princes over who was going to succeed the ruler. Hours later, Jonas finally finishes his story, and Isaac admits that his younger brother is really good with storytelling because he even lost track of time. Jonas teases his brother, saying he would have just become a poet if he had known, but it might have been hard since he can only use one hand. Isaac hears this and he apologizes to Jonas for what happened. Jonas tells his brother that the whole family hated him. However, they also missed him so much, and they love him to death. Just then, Jonas says it's going to be a shame that he wasn't able to see his brother's face for the last time. Isaac is confused by this, and Jonas mentions that when the war was happening, a gate actually opened, and monsters from another dimension emerged, committing a lot of atrocities. Isaac gets up in shock when he hears this, and he asks Jonas if he is fine. Jonas starts to stammer, while regretting that he didn't come earlier. Just then, Isaac notices blood coming from under the door, and he quickly opens the door, only to find a sword sticking out of his brother's belly. Jonas crashes to the ground, and Isaac watches his brother's dead body in horror. He couldn't believe that his brother was dying, but was still able to talk that long. He then carries his brother on his shoulder, and as he walks up the basement stairs, tears run down his face because of how light his brother is, showing just how much he has starved. After so many years, Isaac returns to the surface, and what he meets is total destruction. The mansion is in ruins, and a monster's body can be seen lying in the hall. As he steps outside, Isaac notices that it is winter because it is snowing. Since he won't be able to bury his brother in that season, he promises to bury him when it is spring, so he can use the family cemetery. Isaac also concludes that this is when he is going to die. Spring finally comes, and as promised, Isaac buries his brother. While standing over his brother's grave, he raises his hand and is able to produce a fireball. Isaac lets off a short smile because he has finally been able to do it after so long. He has been researching how he can overcome his special constitution for so long, but he has finally done it. In his left hand is a broken runestone, and since he has seen that he could overcome his special constitution, Isaac figures out that he can finally die too. He wonders if he would be forgiven for every pain that he has caused. He regrets the fact that he didn't start his research earlier and wonders if things could have changed for him. With this, Isaac crashes to the ground and dies. Suddenly, he hears a familiar voice calling his name, and this turns out to be Hans's voice. Isaac doesn't want to believe his ears because Hans died years ago, and when he opens his eyes, he is in his young body. Hans stands by the window and opens it because Isaac is drenched in sweat and looks pale. Isaac sits up, wondering if he is dreaming, while also assuming that his life is flashing before his eyes at the time of death. Hans walks to the window to see a young Jonas playing and stressing the maids out. Isaac lets out a good smile when it finally dawns on him that he is not dreaming, but he has somewhat returned to the past. He is now faced with a new life where he is expected to break free from the shackles of his past. As he stands by the window, Isaac has a flashback. Isaac once heard the maids in the other room complaining about his condition and how it always causes trouble. They are left to clean the mess that he makes, but they are always scared of when his mana will explode again. Hans soon hears this, and just as he is about to move into the room to scold them, Isaac stops him, telling Hans that they are not actually wrong. In fact, Isaac tells Hans to stop coming to see him too. Hans has a bandage wrapped around his head, and Isaac reminds him that this happened because he was next to him. Hans kneels in front of Isaac to comfort him, telling him that he is wrong about the whole thing. Hans lets Isaac know that he still cares about him, but it appears that he is going through a difficult time, and once it passes, it will no longer be a big deal. Hans spoke brightly back then, but this was how he also lost his life due to one of his mana explosions. Now that he's been given a second chance, Isaac wonders what he is supposed to do. Isaac decides to take a bold step and he coldly tells Hans to leave. Hans thinks Isaac is joking until Isaac makes it clear that he doesn't want to see him around. Hans reluctantly leaves, and even though it hurts Isaac to do this, he knows that being close to Hans will only put him in danger. As Hans leaves the room, he urges Isaac not to try to shoulder all the responsibility himself. Hans tells him that it is okay for him to trust them sometimes. After he leaves, Isaac realizes that Hans never said this in his dream, but then he slaps his face to confirm that he is truly not in a dream. The slap hurts him so much that it confirms to him that he is back in the past. He wonders how he died in his past life, but he decides to shove this aside because it doesn't matter if it is a dream or reality. What he needs to do is to prevent himself from having a mana explosion ever again. Apparently, in the past, there was someone who suffered the same condition as him, and this person was Zeke von Goethe. He was able to reach a realm where no human had reached before, which is a 10th class mage. This person was Isaac's great-great-grandfather, and he was only able to learn about him from the ancestral records that his father passed down to him when he lived in the underground cell. After years of detailed study, he discovered a way to overcome the special constitution, which is with a particular rune stone. Isaac then carves a pattern from his research onto a mana stone to create the specific rune stone that he needs. Isaac grabs the stone and realizes just how good it is to be young again because his hands used to shake before, but he is easily holding the stone firm. Apparently, to prevent the side effect of his special constitution, which is the mana explosion, the vessel that holds his mana must withstand the endlessly circulating mana. However, Isaac's mana flows so insanely fast and violently that the vessel cannot withstand it. A normal person is supposed to die the moment it shatters, but for some unknown reason, Isaac's vessel restores itself as if nothing happened. This is basically why his vessel can explode 10 or even 20 times and he is still alive. The runestone he just carved intentionally damages the mana pathways, and a continuous impact is applied to the damaged area, which leads to a new pathway opening. This is how the shock of the violent mana ends up getting dispersed. However, the success rate is quite low, and he barely succeeded right before he died. The small flame he made before he died was proof of his success, and he wonders if this will work this time around. Isaac tries to create a small fireball just like back then, but to his shock, he unleashes a flame so huge that it scares the hell out of him. Isaac cannot believe the amount of power that is flowing through him, and when he takes a look at the runestone, it still remains intact. Isaac finally figures out that his pathways have increased to 3. Each of the pathways has a different size and property, and he can manifest 3 magic spells simultaneously. Isaac cannot believe that it actually worked, but he quickly controls himself because this is not his goal. His goal is to prevent any mana explosions from happening, and for this, he figures out that 3 pathways are not enough. He realizes that he has to use more magic more often to increase the pathways. In addition, this will help minimize the burden placed on his mana vessel, but until then, he can't let anyone stay by his side. In fact, there won't be any exception whatsoever. Later on, Isaac is studying when Hans shows up in the room with a smile on his face, telling Isaac that he has brought him his favorite food, but Isaac is forced to remind him that he already told him that he doesn't want to see him. Hans tries to persuade Isaac, reminding him that he hasn't been eating well lately, so he should have at least one piece. Isaac cannot believe that Hans is not ready to listen to him, and to make it worse, he is wearing such a cute face. Isaac then asks Hans how old he is, and Hans replies that he is currently 12 years old. Since he is still at a young age, he figures out that he is at an age where he has to behave like a normal child. Isaac takes a bite out of the bread and he realizes that Nanny must have been the one who made the bread. He loves the bread so much, and he realizes just how much he's missed the bread. Isaac asks Hans where Nanny is because he hasn't seen her that day, and Hans reveals that Nanny's son, Hinder, has pneumonia. When he hears this, Isaac stops eating and talks about how nice his family is because another family would not allow Nanny to head home to take care of her son. Isaac takes his time before asking Hans if Hinder is the only one who came down with pneumonia, and Hans reveals that all of the children already have it. Upon hearing this, Isaac finally remembers what is happening. The incident that happened around this time was the Black Goose Village mass pneumonia incident. Nanny lost her son in the incident, and she had to live with a huge sense of loss until the day she died. It turns out that she also died from one of Isaac's mana explosion incidents. Remembering this terrible incident, Isaac figures out that it would be bad if the woman went through this again. Isaac remembers something important and immediately asks Hans what sort of monster or monsters were recently subjugated in the Nanny's village. After hearing Hans's answer, Isaac packed up and vanished to the Black Goose Village. Hans had told Isaac that he didn't get a good look at the monster, but it appears that people from the Magic Tower came to buy it as research material. However, from what he was able to see, it appeared to be a giant spider that was covered in silver fur. From Hans's description, Isaac realizes that he was talking about a winter spider. Winter spiders are not that strong, but they do form large swarms due to their incredible breeding rate. The real issue is that the winter spiders possess a highly dense mana that causes one to suffer from mana poisoning when one is exposed to it. This acts like a poison that slowly suffocates the affected person. Isaac figures out that the children in the village were poisoned by the mana emitted by the winter spiders. Isaac makes his way into the woods to gather herbs because he knows all about mana poisoning. However, it is still something new in this era, which is why they all believe that it is pneumonia. After gathering loads of herbs, he believes that he has enough to feed the children to alleviate their symptoms. However, its healing effects will only be temporary, and to prevent a relapse of the symptoms, the winter spiders must be completely wiped out. Isaac knows that it would have been nice to ask his parents for help, but his father is usually stationed at the border fortress, and his mother is currently traveling the continent, searching for a cure for his special constitution. Isaac knows that he can't wait around till they get back because Hinder would have died by then. Soon afterward, the nanny is watching over her son when she hears a knock on her door. She walks to the door to open, and to her surprise, she finds Isaac. Isaac is so exhausted from his travel and the effort to gather herbs that he falls into the woman's arms. The nanny asks him if something happened at the estate, which is why he left at that late hour. Isaac reveals that he is only worried because she hasn't come to work for days, and he came to check on her. The nanny tells Isaac that she might not allow him to come in because Hinder has pneumonia and he might catch it too. To convince the woman, Isaac ties a piece of clothing over his nose, but even with this, the nanny is still reluctant to let him in. Isaac hands her the bag full of herbs and straight up walks into the house. He tells the nanny to crush the herbs, mash them, put them in a pot, brew them twice, let them cool, and then feed them to Hinder. Isaac heads to the room where Hinder is resting, and from the bluish spots all over his face, Isaac confirms that he is suffering from mana poisoning. Isaac calls Hinder's name, and he weakly answers. The first thing Hinder tells Isaac is that he should not fire his mother because she isn't able to come to work because of him. Isaac pats Hinder's forehead, assuring him that he is not going to fire his mom because he is the only one who sneaks him wheat bread, so he should just focus on getting better. Later on, Isaac has a hunter lead him to an abandoned mine. Upon arriving at the entrance of the cave, Isaac asks the dude if he is sure that this is the limestone cave, and the man assures him that it is. Isaac pays the dude his fare and tells him that he is going to handle the rest from that point forward. As he leaves, the old man urges Isaac to be careful because people have gone missing around the cave in the past. Apparently, winter spiders prefer limestone caves, and since this is the only limestone cave in the area, Isaac believes that the winter spiders are currently nesting in the area. However, before going inside the cave, he figures out that it would be better if he prepares well. He remembers that he can currently manifest 3 spells simultaneously, which puts him on par with a second-class mage. However, he can't overexert himself because his mana vessel might just shatter. In addition, he can't recklessly use magic since he doesn't know how many spiders are in there. Isaac then looks around and he finds exactly what he needs, which is the frost belladonna. The berries of the plant are usually diluted and used as a paralytic or anesthetic, but they are a deadly poison to winter spiders. Isaac cannot believe the irony that they live in the same habitat as their lethal weakness. After gathering so much belladonna, Isaac realizes that it would have been better if he had brought some gloves because his hands have swollen already, showing just how potent the poison is. Since he already made plenty of rune stones back when he was at the estate, he figures out that it is time for him to get going. Upon entering the cave, he realizes that there is a ledge and it goes straight down into a dark center. He looks around to see if there is a way for him to get down there, and fortunately for him, he finds a ladder that goes down. Isaac grabs the ladder and starts climbing down, and by the time he reaches the bottom, he is already exhausted. However, with the look of things, he realizes that he has found the right place. There are skeletons on the floor, and they are both from monsters and humans. Isaac wonders if the human bones are from the missing people that the hunter mentioned. Just then, he hears rustling around him, and he immediately creates a bunch of fireballs to surround himself. Thanks to the fire, he spots the spiders in the distance staring at him. However, he is not entirely scared because he knows that the fire will keep the spiders away since they hate fire. However, he has to prepare just before they decide to swarm him. Isaac ties a piece of clothing around his nose before he starts anything. Once he is ready, he sets the belladonna on fire and the smoke from it starts to fill the cave. As the smoke hits the spiders, they react to it negatively, and seeing just how irritated the spiders are by the smoke, Isaac figures out that it is finally time for him to begin the hunt. In the past, Isaac had stood by his window to watch one of the citizens confront his father about the bad things that were happening in the territory. He blames him because he is the lord of the territory and should have done something to avert the whole mess, but instead he believes that he has failed the people. The whole issue was mainly about the Black Goose Village, and because of how noisy the whole thing is, Isaac started considering a move to the basement. Since the basement is quieter and has fewer people around, he can just focus more on researching his special constitution there. In addition, he considers covering the wall with dimetridium because it is a material with high magic resistance to help contain his mana explosions. After talking to himself for too long, he finally called Hans's name, only to realize that Hans was dead. Now, in the present, as he sits in the cave, he wonders why he has to remember these terrible old memories. He looks around and realizes that the belladonna is seriously weakening the spiders, and since he can't feed the poison to the spiders directly, all he can do is burn the flower and let the smoke spread so it can paralyze them until they suffocate. However, this method is not flawless because he won't be safe from it too, which is why he wrapped a wet piece of clothing around his face as a primary filter. Any poison that slips into his body will be purified with the mana inside his body. He had also created a compressed fireball, which he uses as his defense to keep the spiders away. He is basically using 3 types of magic at the same time, which are purification, fire magic, and phase shift on the fire magic. He is able to cast all 3 spells simultaneously through 3 mana circuits, which could also be referred to as multi-circuit. It was thanks to this that he could buy time for the spiders to weaken, and once they are paralyzed, Isaac finishes them with a fireball. He notices that the survivors are running in one direction, and from a closer observation, he realizes that there is water where they are heading. However, there is still no hope for them because they are going to be burned to a crisp. At the same time, he is scared that he might actually suffocate if he is not careful, so he has to end everything quickly. Isaac then takes off his coat before heading to the water side. However, the moment he gets there, he starts regretting his decision to have left the coat because of how cold the whole area is. The temperature in the room has dropped so low that it could form ice, and just then he raises his head to see that the entire ceiling of the cave is filled with spider eggs. The moment he sees this, he remembers something important that sends shivers down his spine. He continues investigating the area while throwing fireballs around to make lightning for himself. Not long after this, his fears come to life as he finds himself face to face with a giant spider, which is the winter spider queen. A cold sweat trickles down his face as he trembles in fear, and without hesitation, the monster attacks him. Isaac manages to leap into the distance to avoid getting impaled by the monster's claws. He lands hard on the icy floor, causing him to groan in pain, but he immediately gets back on his feet while berating himself for always jinxing his luck. Unlike the other winter spiders, the Spider Queen is a monster that has fire resistance and even exhales frost. This is the very reason why they are called winter spiders. With fear running through his body, Isaac hurls fireballs at the spider, but it doesn't really affect the monster. Isaac is not surprised by this because he doesn't expect the spider to just burn up and die like the other spiders. Isaac knows that he would be a dead man if the Spider Queen weren't slow. However, he still has a big problem, and this is the fact that his body is slowly reaching its limit. With a 12-year-old body that has no combat experience, he knows that it is natural for him to be exhausted. To make it worse, he stayed up all night and then used magic all day. Isaac soon realizes that no one is coming to save him, and he has to get over his fear. He starts to remember the sacrifices the nanny has made just for him to be comfortable. Apparently, wheat doesn't even grow in the northern region where they are, but the nanny travels to a distant city every week just to get high-quality wheat for him to be able to eat soft bread. Upon remembering this, Isaac pulls himself together, and he decides that he is going to ask the nanny to make him a lot of bread when he gets back home. Isaac reaches for his shovel and drops his backpack as he prepares to engage the queen spider head-on because even if it is a queen, it is still a bug. Isaac drops his backpack and rushes toward the queen with his shovel. Using the queen's slow movement against her, Isaac strikes her head with the shovel, leaving a hole in it. However, this is not enough to kill the queen as he gets dragged underneath the queen monster. Nonetheless, Isaac refuses to let go of the monster's leg. After a brief deliberation on what to do to take down the monster, he figures out that he has to use a different approach. He creates a fireball which he compresses and then compresses even further until the flame turns blue. Once it is powerful enough for what he wants, he releases the compressed blue flame into the spider's belly. Just as he wanted, the flame starts to cook the insides of the Spider Queen. As the spider shakes with its life leaving its body, Isaac tries to pull out his hand, but he finds it difficult to do so because the spider won't stay still. After trying so hard, he finally gets to pull out his arm. Isaac crashes to the ground and he hits his head. However, the blue flame is enough to take down the spider and even burn a block of ice. Later on, Isaac hears familiar voices around him, and these are Hans and the nanny's voices. He hears them as they talk about how he went into the abandoned mine, which caused him to hurt himself. This is when it dawns on Isaac that he actually defeated the Winter Spider Queen, and after this, he fell unconscious when he hit his head on the ground. However, he woke up after this and barely made it out of the abandoned mine and back to the village. After this, he ran into Hans, who was loitering at the village entrance, and he just fell asleep in his arms. Now that he is awake, Isaac hears the nanny telling Hans that after she did what Isaac told him, Hinder was completely cured. Hans glazes Isaac, saying this is just how he is, because he might have gotten insensitive after the mana explosion, but his good heart never left him. Isaac almost explodes from blushing when he hears this, and he is forced to sit up so they can know that he is already awake. The two are shocked to see this, and he asks them how long he was asleep. Hans tells him that he was out for about half a day, and she asks him if he is fine. He replies that he is good and the pain is a bit bearable. The woman freaks out when she hears this, asking Isaac what he means by bearable. She demands to know why he went to such a dangerous place alone, and he calmly replies that he fell while trying to gather some nearby herbs. Isaac knows that he obviously can't tell them that he killed a monster because there is no way they are going to believe that a 12-year-old like him did, so it would be better for him to just come up with an excuse. Isaac then asks the nanny how Hinder is doing, and she replies that he is much better after she gave him the herbs that he prescribed. In fact, the other kids in the village are all doing well. Isaac is glad to hear this, and he figures out that it would be better to keep the mana poisoning a secret because if the higher-ups find out, scholars would be brought in. It will definitely become a problem if the winter spider corpses in the abandoned mine are discovered. The nanny asks Isaac how he knows about the herbs, and he lies that he read about them in a book. Isaac then suggests that they forget about the matter, and he tells Hans that it is time for them to go. Hans lets him know that it is not proper for them to go yet because it is snowy outside. However, Isaac reminds Hans that he is going to be in a lot of trouble if they find out that he left the estate under his watch. Hans quickly agrees to this, and as they are about to leave, the nanny gives Isaac a basket of apples to take with him. It turns out that the apples were gathered by the villagers to show their gratitude. Isaac then tells the nanny to take another week off because it would be better for her to resume when Hinder has fully recovered. The nanny is surprised to hear this, and she asks Isaac if the head butler won't complain about this. Isaac shocks her, telling her that she is not going to be idle throughout the week. Isaac tells her to make jam with the apples so he can eat it with wheat bread when she returns to work. The nanny agrees to this with a smile on her face and tells Isaac that she is going to make apple pie too. A week later, Isaac is seen jogging around the estate. During this time, his mana vessel had changed and the 3 circuits had turned to 4. The mana vessel stabilized more too, and the number of magic spells he can simultaneously use increased to 4. He figures out that fighting the winter spiders and pushing himself to the limit probably helped with this. In addition, he knows that running around the estate contributed to it too. Basically, using magic requires comprehension and calculation, including intuition. This is a task that consumes a considerable amount of mental power. When the body breaks down, the mind breaks down too, and it is pretty obvious that mental power requires physical stamina. He knows that he reached his limit in the abandoned mine because he was donning an untrained young body. Isaac remembers that in his past life, Lucas used to train his stamina. Isaac is in the middle of his training when he is called upon by the head butler Schiller, who tells him that it is time for his regular checkup. The doctor walks forward to greet Isaac while asking him how he is feeling. Apparently, the dude is the personal doctor that was assigned to him by his father, and they claim he is the most successful doctor in the territory close to them. However, even the supposed expert doctor couldn't figure out his weird constitution. After he is done with the checkup, the doctor tells him that he is fine. He decides to change Isaac's medicine, but Isaac knows that he is just going to prescribe rubbish. The doctor reaches into his briefcase and reveals 6 bottles of a potion called Panacea. This is a potion that stabilizes the flow of mana. When Isaac sees this, he realizes that his father is going to extreme lengths to make sure he gets the good stuff. Basically, Panacea means cure-all in the common tongue, and it is used as a stimulant for some and a performance enhancer for soldiers. While the potion is known to stabilize the flow of mana, it is actually a misunderstanding that occurred while translating the ancient language. Its actual effect is stimulating the flow of mana, which means it is poison for him because his mana goes out of control. However, for his current situation, it is the right catalyst because if used well, it will help increase his mana circuits. After the doctor's departure, Isaac notices that Schiller is staring at him, and he asks him if he has anything to say. Schiller reveals his surprise that Isaac looks really calm because he is always throwing tantrums over being seen. Thanks to this, the doctors in the direct territory refuse to be his personal doctor, and Isaac asks Schiller if it would have been better if he had thrown a fit just as he used to. Schiller stays mute for a second before finally opening up, telling Isaac that he learned from Hans that he cured the children in Black Goose of pneumonia. When Isaac hears this, he realizes that Schiller had interrogated Hans. Schiller tells Isaac that it is going to become a big issue if the advisory committee finds out about it. Schiller then coldly tells Isaac that he is going to let it slide this time, but he urges Isaac to restrain himself. But if he can't, he tells Isaac that he should inform him first. Even in his past life, Isaac wasn't able to get close to Schiller because he was always dry and an unbending head butler. He is a supposed cold man who would always keep his distance from the others. However, according to what he heard from Jonas before he died, Schiller served the family until the very end, before losing his life. Deep down, Schiller cares a lot and only tries to act like a hard guy. Isaac then smiles, telling Schiller that he understands what he means by this. Schiller then asks Isaac if there is any particular reason why he has been running for the past couple of days. Isaac replies that throughout history, mages who reached the 5th class or higher trained their bodies, and since it is a body that channels mana, it should stay in a fit state. Later that night, Schiller writes his report about how Isaac cured the children of Black Goose Village of their pneumonia. Schiller believes that due to the nature of his constitution, it will be hard for him to use magic in the future. Schiller believes that a path as a scholar or alchemist might be right for him. He believes that with this, Isaac's father will also be relieved of some worry. Just then, a maid, Rosa, enters Schiller's office telling him that maids are disappearing. 2 girls, Clara and Annette, have vanished, and Rosa says she can actually vouch for Annette, if not Clara, that she is a good girl. In fact, Annette hasn't taken a day off in 3 years, which means something has definitely happened to her. Later on, Rosa is seen talking with another maid and a servant named Bill. Bill talks trash about the territory, saying it is not the best place to live because the weather is harsh in this area of the world, and the bandits or monsters always show up all the time. The other maid asks Bill if he is basically saying he is going to run away, and he casually replies that the possibility is not 0. The girl then says Annette is not like him who can just disappear out of nowhere because she worked hard to pay for her father's medicine. Bill stupidly says the girl must have gotten sick of taking care of her sick dad, or maybe she ran off with some deadbeat dude. Rosa yells at Bill, telling him to watch his mouth, but Bill defends himself, saying he is just putting out his own theory. The two tell him that they are not interested in whatever theory he has. Bill continues by saying whatever is happening might be an action of dark magic. They ask him what he means by this, and he reminds them that they are working for a family of mages. In addition, Isaac is not in good condition, and he believes that his father is using whatever magic he can get his hands on to heal his son. This is when it dawns on Rosa and her colleague that Bill is saying that the missing girls were sacrificed alive. Rosa scolds him, telling him to stop spreading stupid rumors, reminding Bill that the master of the house took him in even though he was a criminal. The two are arguing with each other when Isaac appears behind them, telling Bill that he has a very interesting story. Isaac smiles at him, urging him to tell him more of the story, and Bill freaks out when he realizes that he has run his mouth in Isaac's presence. Isaac then takes Bill to his office to hear more from him. Bill reveals that the first maid who disappeared 2 months ago was Hilda, and a few weeks later, Clara went missing. It was the past weekend that Annette vanished after going to Mass. With a cold stare, Isaac asks him if he has any idea why this happened. Deep down, Bill is worried when he sees just how cold Isaac's glare is, and he replies that he has no idea what might have happened. Isaac then assures him that he can be honest and he won't punish him for it. Bill is forced to ask if Isaac is sure about what he is saying, and Isaac says yes. Bill stays mute for a minute, and Isaac asks him if he thinks the girls disappeared because of him. Bill stutters before saying it is quite obvious that it is related to him. He mentions that Hans is the closest to Isaac and he is always bruised or injured. In addition, he is always complaining about one pain or the other. Bill continues running his mouth, saying he is pretty sure that Hans would be the one to die the most painful death of all. Bill stops talking immediately when he realizes that Isaac's mood has totally changed and he starts freaking out, begging Isaac to spare his life. He talks about how he hasn't gotten married or even had any kids, and Isaac casually asks him if he wants to live. Isaac lets him know that if he wants to live, he would have to do some work for him. Later on, Isaac is seen in his room thinking about Rosa and Annette. In his past life, after Hans and his nanny died, they were the only maids who volunteered to serve him. Even when he tried to get rid of them, the two refused to leave. He even tells them to stop bringing him potions because they are useless. But the two urge Isaac not to give up hope because everything will definitely get better. Isaac didn't really take this well, telling them how bad it is to kill someone he loves with his own hands. Isaac screams at them, asking them if they know how it feels, and Annette steps up, telling Isaac that she knows because she caused her friend's death with her own hands. Isaac is surprised to hear this, and he asks for more details. Annette reveals that it happened in the past, saying she might have been able to save Clara if she had reached out to her. Annette walks up to Isaac, telling him that she understands his unique situation. However, she lets him know that anyone can end up doing things that they never intended. She calmly tells Isaac that it can happen to anyone once in their lives. Surprisingly, Annetta's talk was able to bring him comfort back then. Now, in the present, Isaac regrets that he didn't ask for more details. Moments later, Bill shows up in the room, and it appears that Isaac had given him a mission to find out where the maids went. Bill confidently says he has because it didn't even take him long. Bill claims that he asked around among beggars near the roads, and their descriptions matched perfectly. Isaac asks him what he found out, and Bill replies that the conclusion was that they were grabbed by slave traders. He says the slave traders trick people by saying they will take them to the prosperous South but end up selling them off. Isaac expresses his confusion, saying they could have gone to the South on their own without a broker if they wanted to. Bill then tells Isaac that he has it all wrong because the road to the South is dangerous and treacherous, which is why they needed someone to protect them throughout the journey. After saying this, Isaac agrees with him, saying his theory makes sense, but deep down, Bill has an agenda. He assumes that Isaac is still a kid and that he is clueless about how the world works. Bill then tells Isaac that it cost him a lot of money to get the beggars to talk, so he has spent all 20 silver coins that he gave him as travel funds. Isaac is surprised to hear this because the amount is enough for half a year's wages. Bill claims that everyone was on guard, and Isaac tells him that he doesn't really care about the money because what he wants is to find the maids as quickly as he can. Bill lets off a huge smile when he hears this, and he immediately asks Isaac if there is something else he wants him to do. Isaac says yes, assuring him that he is going to be well compensated for this. Bill celebrates deeply when he hears this because, to him, he has found a sucker. He is convinced that if he plays Isaac right, things will become lucrative for him. He sees Isaac as a freshly laid golden egg, but the only flaw is that Isaac is a ticking time bomb. Nonetheless, he is not worried because there is no reward without a bit of risk. With a smile on his face, he tells Isaac that he can lead him to the broker. But everything happens in a flash, and when he opens his eyes, he finds himself in a cell in only his underwear. He screams out in shock, asking how he got into a cell, but unknown to him, Isaac is standing behind him with a runestone in his hand, and he is coldly smiling at the dude's misfortune. In a dark and damp dungeon, Bill had trembled as he gripped the iron bars of the cell, cursing how things had ended up like this, and thinking that everything had been going so well when he had secretly taken the young master out of the estate and headed toward the city of Baron. He reflected that finding the broker who had taken the maids had been easy enough, since the man claimed to be an exiled noble traveling south, but Isaac's expensive clothes and handsome appearance had inevitably made him a target for criminals. Bill had miserably admitted that he understood why the young master had been targeted by slave traders because of his pretty face, yet he could not understand why he himself had ended up imprisoned too. He had also pointed out that the young master had not even been harmed because he was considered luxury merchandise, while Isaac merely held a magic stone in his hand, and wondered whether he needed to condense the mana more since it differed from what he had read in books. Bill, unable to comprehend the situation, had complained that he himself had been stripped of everything and desperately asked what they were supposed to do now. He demanded to know whether Isaac had come there with some sort of plan and angrily told him to stop playing with the stone and say something. Isaac had sighed tiredly and asked whether Bill had finally dropped the formalities. Bill had furiously pointed at him and replied that no one would remain formal in such circumstances because they were going to die. Isaac had calmly declared that he intended to escape and find Annette and the other maids. Bill had scoffed at the statement and sarcastically replied that such a plan assumed Isaac had some way of breaking through the solid iron bars. In response, Isaac had merely flicked a finger, causing the iron bars to fall to the ground with a loud clang. Bill had stared in shock as the prison door broke apart before his eyes. Completely unable to believe what he had witnessed, he had hesitantly called out to the young master and anxiously asked whether Isaac was not planning to leave him behind. Isaac had coldly questioned whether he even knew Bill. Desperate to curry favor, Bill had awkwardly pleaded with him not to act that way and explained that the place was like a maze. At that moment, the guards outside had heard the noise and wondered what the sound had been before deciding to investigate. Bill had urgently tried to persuade Isaac to help him escape, warning that Isaac would get lost and eventually be surrounded by bandits. Isaac, however, had shown no concern at all and turned his back while claiming that he could handle such things himself. He had then casually said that he was leaving and wished Bill luck with his escape. Left behind alone, Bill had panicked and called after him, begging him to wait and repeatedly shouting for the young master. Isaac had turned around in confusion and asked what it was. Bill had immediately collapsed to his knees and desperately begged Isaac to save him, swearing that he would do absolutely anything in return. Isaac had suddenly stopped walking and fallen into deep thought. He remarked that Bill's behavior looked exactly the same as it had once before. Memories from a previous life resurfaced in Isaac's mind, where Bill had once been tied up and forced to kneel upon freezing snow while desperately begging Arthur to spare his life. Bill had tearfully confessed that he had completely lost his mind and should never have betrayed the man who had kindly taken him in. Arthur had frowned and reminded Bill that he had originally been a bandit who survived House Goethe's campaign against bandits by betraying his own comrades. Arthur had then declared that since Bill had now betrayed House Goethe as well, he could no longer trust him. Terrified, Bill had begged the young master for forgiveness just this once. Schiller, however, had furiously shouted that enough was enough and demanded whether Bill had truly believed he could be forgiven after trying to sell House Goethe's secret books to a criminal organization. Bill had cried and promised that he would never betray them again, but before he could finish speaking, Arthur had cut off his head with a single slash, staining his blade crimson with blood. Isaac remembered Arthur coldly remarking that Bill would have been useful had he not been so greedy. Isaac reflected clearly upon that day and reasoned that, as a former bandit who understood the underworld economy well, Bill must have used his own connections to track down the maids. Isaac also believed Bill had lied about spending all the silver coins. Recalling the past, Isaac realized that the criminal organization Bill had attempted to sell the books to in his previous life was the very same group of bandits currently responsible for kidnapping the maids. He thought bitterly that those bastards had grown powerful through human trafficking and would eventually spread through Goethe like a disease, tormenting countless people. Isaac firmly concluded that any seed threatening the family had to be uprooted completely. Isaac had then taken out a scroll and reminded Bill that he had promised to do anything. Unrolling the parchment before him, Isaac declared that there was something Bill needed to do first. Elsewhere in the dim underground dungeon, the only source of light had been a faint, flickering lamp. Several guards stood in a corner while Niers sat at a dining table. He had spoken to the skull placed before him, lamenting that his father was refusing to eat again that day. Raising a piece of bloody steak toward the skull, Niers had pleaded with it to eat something and worried about what he would do if his father continued wasting away. He then muttered that his father's soul was still there somewhere and promised that once his black magic succeeded, they would be able to see each other again. Receiving no answer, Niers wondered if the soul's power had weakened. Suddenly, Niers had demanded to know where his bathwater was. Henry had flinched in fear and nervously explained that the only remaining people were the merchandise intended for merchants. Without hesitation, Nears had grabbed Henry's face with one massive hand and lifted his entire body into the air, squeezing hard enough to splatter blood across his own face. Nears coldly remarked that Henry should suffice as bathwater instead. Terrified, Ken had stammered that he would prepare it immediately. After Nears left, his figure disappearing into the darkness, Ken and Jin had collapsed onto the floor in fear. Ken had rubbed his forehead with a pale expression and cursed black magic, wondering if that madman had already done such things 10 times by now. He complained that Nears used people in both his food and bathwater, and suggested that next time they should simply hand over the merchandise they intended to sell. Otherwise, they themselves would end up dead. Jin had dragged Henry's corpse away while telling Ken to stop complaining and just deal with the situation. At that moment, a loud noise echoed through the hallway outside. Curious, both men peeked out, only to find an empty and freezing dark corridor. They exchanged confused looks as sweat rolled down their faces. Then the strange sound came again. Trembling in fear, Jin had asked what the noise was. Moments later, both men had frozen in shock as a severed head rolled across the floor before them. Jin had swallowed nervously and recognized it as Boss Nears' head. The severed head belonged to Nears, whose eyes remained wide open in terror even in death. Completely horrified, the two men's legs had trembled so badly they could barely stand as they stammered in disbelief. Bill had then casually walked toward them holding a blood-stained knife in his hand. In a relaxed tone, he had asked whether they could spare some water. Jin had widened his eyes in panic upon recognizing him. Bill, his face covered in blood, had smiled faintly while Jin stared blankly and called out his name in disbelief. Brushing back his hair, Bill had once again demanded that the bastards give him some water. Seeing the severed head lying alone on the floor, they had been too terrified to speak properly, their throats feeling as though something were choking them, while the sound of thud echoed through the area. Bill had slowly approached the two of them and asked, "Hey!" Both of them had frozen in shock upon seeing him, stammering out, "Bill?" Bill had tightened his grip around the knife in his hand and cursed, saying that he did not even know why he was doing that and that it was all that kid's fault. Isaac had then taken out a sheet of paper and reminded him that he had said he would do anything, adding that there was something he needed to do first. Bill had curiously asked what it was. Isaac had explained that it was a contract and began listing the terms. First, the contractor, Bill, had to obey the contractee, Isaac, unconditionally. Second, the contractor, Bill, was forbidden from revealing any information regarding the contractee, Isaac. And third, if Bill violated any of the terms above, the penalty would be death. Bill had gaped in disbelief and protested, asking what kind of terms those were. Isaac had calmly picked up a sharp knife and explained that Bill would sign it with his blood because that was the only way for the magic to take effect, adding that the knife would do perfectly. Bill had immediately shouted in outrage, asking if Isaac was crazy and why he would ever sign something like that. At that moment, the guards had heard the noise and shouted, asking who was there. Isaac had urgently told Bill to hurry because they did not have much time and asked whether he wanted to live or not. As hurried footsteps echoed closer and the heavily written contract remained spread before him, Bill had shut his eyes tightly and made his decision. He had snatched the knife from Isaac's hand while cursing under his breath, then cut his own hand despite the pain. Trembling violently, he had pressed his bloody finger onto the contract. In the next instant, a flash of light had appeared, and Isaac's lips had curled upward faintly. The guards had finally arrived and demanded to know who they were and how they had escaped their cells. Bill had panicked and warned that they were coming. Isaac had immediately launched attacks directly at their foreheads, causing all three guards to collapse at once. Bill had stared in horror and asked whether they were dead. Isaac had explained that they had merely passed out. Unable to believe what he had just witnessed, Bill had asked how Isaac could do such a thing. In response, Isaac had held up a glowing magic stone and created a small sphere of ice, revealing that it was magic. Inside the damp dungeon, the sound of dripping water had echoed endlessly, while Isaac and Bill followed the sewage pipes through the underground passages. Bill had awkwardly laughed and admitted that it was the first time he had ever seen ice magic, praising Isaac as incredible. Isaac had shaken the stone lightly and remarked that it made sense because ice magic was not very practical. Bill had been surprised and questioned whether it truly was not practical. Isaac had stared thoughtfully at the stone and replied that it certainly seemed that way. As they continued walking, Bill had suddenly stopped and whispered that there were bandits nearby. Isaac had quietly hummed before asking Bill what was needed to make ice. Confused, Bill had asked why Isaac was suddenly bringing that up. Isaac had simply smiled and told him to guess. Bill had slowly realized the answer and hesitantly replied that it was water. Isaac had then created a sphere of water and explained that Bill was correct. He elaborated that whether it was moisture in the air or puddles on the ground, one first had to shape the water into the desired form. After that came compression, condensation, expansion, and finally the last stage. He explained that controlling each step individually was simple, but executing all four simultaneously was extremely difficult. Bill, however, had anxiously urged him to hurry because they were about to be caught. Nearby, Victor, who had been standing guard, suddenly heard movement and demanded to know who they were. Isaac had instantly pushed Bill aside while forming a sphere of ice and quietly stated that this was the final stage. He had manipulated the ice sphere so that it dropped directly toward Victor's head. By the time Victor realized what it was, it had already been too late. Isaac had then cast his spell, explaining that because of all those complicated steps, ice magic was not very useful in combat. He added that if he did not possess the cold mana stone, he would not have bothered using it at all. Isaac further explained that he had taken the stone from the corpse of the Winter Spider Queen, and that although ice magic was unpopular, cold mana stones held academic value and could be sold for a high price, making it an unexpectedly valuable acquisition. Bill had kicked Victor's unconscious body and asked why Isaac bothered using ice magic at all if it was so inconvenient, noting that Victor was completely unconscious. Isaac had explained that because ice magic was so unpopular, very few people understood it. He said that its effects were difficult to distinguish from blunt force trauma, and once the ice melted into water, no evidence remained behind, making it perfect for stealth. Bill had felt uneasy because Isaac's smile looked chillingly cold. He had then asked whether Isaac intended to finish them off. Meanwhile, bandits in the hallway had been shouting in confusion, asking who those people were and how the cargo had escaped. Isaac had shaken his head and replied that even if they killed those men, trash like them could easily be replaced. Bill had curiously asked whether they would not simply continue committing the same crimes again. Isaac had casually waved his hand, causing the men to be attacked once more, and explained that was precisely why he was leaving them alive. With murderous intent filling his eyes, he declared that there was only one person he intended to kill. At that moment, Nears had stepped before them. Bill's entire body had stiffened immediately while Isaac stared directly at the man. Nears had looked at the two of them and addressed them casually. Bill had panicked upon recognizing him and exclaimed that Nears was the bandit leader, describing him as a psychopath who tore people apart with his bare hands. Isaac had nodded calmly and remarked that if that was the case, it saved him the trouble of hunting Nears down himself. Smiling faintly, Isaac had begun gathering his power. Fragments of ice had slowly accumulated into a sphere before forming into a massive sharp block of ice, which he launched directly toward Nears. The sharp spike had nearly pierced Nears' eye, but Nears had casually knocked it away with his bare hand. Bill had stared in shock and shouted in disbelief that Nears had blocked the attack with his bare hands. Isaac, resting his chin on his hand, had casually remarked that Nears was quite strong and wondered whether he belonged to a northern tribe. Bill had shouted frantically, asking whether Isaac was seriously admiring him at a time like that, and panicked about what they should do because they were going to be torn apart. Nears had then addressed the two of them, remarking that they were the merchandise he had been looking for. He explained that he had been worried there would not be enough water for his bath, so their arrival was perfect timing. Upon realizing Isaac was a mage, Nears had added that Isaac would make excellent material for his black magic. Bill's voice had trembled as he desperately begged for mercy, insisting that he was just a normal human. Nears had raised his massive hand, cold light flashing within his eyes. Terrified, Bill had covered his head with his arms. Yet just before the hand could reach him, it had suddenly stopped. The pain Bill had expected never came. Confused, he had slowly opened his eyes and discovered that Nears' chest had been pierced through by ice created by Isaac. Still dazed, Bill had realized that the ice must have remained from the earlier attack that Nears had blocked. Isaac had exhaled a freezing breath while Nears coughed up blood in agony before finally collapsing unconscious onto the ground. Isaac had then addressed Bill directly, declaring that from that moment onward, Bill was the leader of that place and asking whether he understood what needed to be done. Bill's face had turned pale with fear as hesitation filled him. The hand gripping his knife had trembled uncontrollably. Nevertheless, he had suddenly rushed toward Nears. A sharp stabbing sound had echoed out as blood splattered everywhere. Isaac had smiled in satisfaction before gently closing his eyes. He reflected that anyone could eventually find themselves doing things they never wished to do, at least once in their life. He believed that such experiences happened to everyone, and that once those acts were committed, they could neither be erased nor undone. The guilt would continue haunting a person for the rest of their life. Because of that, he thought there were only two choices left, either suffocate beneath the burden of guilt, or continue fighting forward for the sake of those who had been lost as well. Isaac had then tightly pressed his lips together in irritation, while recalling that back then, Annette had carried the guilt of losing her friend Clara, which was probably why she had once given him that advice. At that moment, Jin had cried out in shock upon seeing Bill. Bill, however, had angrily ordered the others to bring him water immediately, declaring that he did not need to hear the same advice twice. Meanwhile, the sound of wagon wheels rattling across the ground echoed in the distance. Annette and the injured servants had been riding inside the carriage, and a trace of sadness had appeared within her eyes. Isaac silently thought that in this life, Annette would not lose her friend. Clara sadly told the others that she had heard nobles from the south were looking for women from out of town. Hilda curiously asked why, and Clara explained that it was supposedly because the women in the south were unattractive, so the nobles were searching elsewhere for beautiful women to marry. Drawn into the story, Hilda excitedly wondered if she should try going south as well. Clara then said that she had looked into it and heard there was someone who could take them south in exchange for a small fee. She asked Hilda and Annette if they wanted to come along. Annette awkwardly declined, explaining that she needed to take care of her father. She later reflected that it had been the last time she had ever seen Hilda and Clara, and that nobody had heard from them again afterward. Isaac clasped his hands together and remarked that it had happened exactly as Bill had suspected. He asked Annette if she had been kidnapped while searching for the two girls. Annette sadly nodded and explained that when she finally found Hilda and Clara again in the sewers, they had already lost their minds. She admitted that if she had stayed there only a few more days, she probably would have gone insane as well. Isaac frowned thoughtfully and said he could understand why, since the sewers were a place where humans were either sold or eaten. Even for someone like him, who had lived 70 years, it had been horrifying, so he could not imagine what those young girls must have endured. Annette then quietly admitted that she actually could have escaped at any time because the iron gate imprisoning her had already been broken. The sound of Clara sobbing echoed in her mind as Clara, completely disheveled and miserable, cried helplessly. Seeing Clara in that condition had caused Annette to freeze in hesitation. She confessed that if she had remained there only a few more days longer, she might have ended up abandoning Clara behind. Isaac's brows narrowed slightly as he remembered Annette once saying that she would have eventually killed her own friend with her own hands. Realizing the truth behind her words, he gently remarked that reliving such memories must have been difficult and thanked her sincerely for telling him everything. Startled, Annette suddenly remembered something else and said there was one matter still bothering her. Curious, Isaac asked what it was. Annette explained that when the bandits were sending them back to the mansion, both she and Clara had been happy, but Hilda had reacted very differently. She recalled Hilda trembling while biting her nails and muttering fearfully that if she returned to the mansion, she would die. Isaac questioned whether Hilda truly believed she would die if she went back. Annette nodded and replied that it did not seem like Hilda was merely afraid of punishment. Resting a hand against his chin, Isaac murmured that he believed he understood the situation for now and promised that he would investigate further. Hearing those words, Annette finally smiled in relief and mentioned that Rosa had said something interesting. According to Rosa, the reason the bandits had suddenly released them might have been because of Isaac himself. She awkwardly laughed and asked if that sounded ridiculous. Isaac paused briefly before inwardly admitting that Rosa was a surprisingly sharp maid. Annette smiled brightly and said that Rosa's conclusion actually made sense because the only person who would genuinely care about maids like them was Isaac. Being unexpectedly praised left Isaac visibly unaccustomed to the feeling, and he widened his eyes in surprise. Annette then sincerely thanked him and said she was truly grateful to him. She hesitated for a moment before saying they could talk about the rest another time. Still confused, Annette agreed and politely excused herself. As the door slowly closed behind her, silence filled the room once again. Stretching tiredly, Isaac allowed a faint smile to appear on his lips as he thought that he had discovered an unexpected talent and that it might be worthwhile teaching Annette magic. As the sun rose and sunlight filtered through the leaves, the maids gathered together and whispered among themselves. They talked about the maids who had recently returned, mentioning that although they had supposedly been expelled, young Master Isaac had taken them back in. Others added that they had heard Isaac had even gotten into a massive argument with the chief butler over the matter. Some wondered why he would go so far for only a few maids, while others teasingly speculated that perhaps he had become interested in girls now that he was of that age. Meanwhile, Bill silently carried supplies into the storage room and set them down on the floor. At that moment, a shadow appeared inside the warehouse as Ken approached and asked if the boss was there. Bill brushed the dust from his hands and irritably replied that he had already told him not to call him boss. At that moment, Bill recalled Isaac's earlier words in the sewers. Isaac had explained that the sewers were always overflowing with thugs, and even if one criminal organization were destroyed, another would simply replace it. Because of that, Isaac believed it would be better to keep them all under his control instead. Bill inwardly realized that Isaac had planned everything from the beginning, and that this was precisely why he had forced him to sign the contract. He bitterly thought that if conflict or mutiny ever broke out, his own head would be the first to roll. Exhausted, Bill sat down on top of the cargo and asked Ken whether Nears had only planted them inside the mansion. Ken nodded and answered that the former boss had ordered them to keep watch over the mansion. Bill let out a mocking laugh and remarked that Nears had apparently been more than just a lunatic, considering he had even planted spies inside noble households. Ken then added that the boss had always prepared a tribute. Confused, Bill asked what kind of tribute he meant. Ken explained that every year they offered tribute to the knights around that season. He further revealed that the reason their group had been able to settle safely in the sewers was because the knights themselves had secretly protected them. Bill was utterly shocked and repeated in disbelief that the knights had actually been protecting criminals like them. A few days later, Isaac practiced fire magic inside his room. As he hurled a fireball forward, he explained to himself that the flames were merely a distraction, while the true danger was the ice crystal hidden behind them. As the fireball rushed toward the wall, Isaac clenched his fist. The flames gradually disappeared, revealing only a sharp shard of ice shooting straight ahead. With a loud crash, the ice pierced the wall before shattering apart. Breathing heavily, Isaac reflected that after killing Nears, his mana circuits had increased from 4 to 5. Because of that, he now needed to practice simultaneously casting different types of magic. He admitted that his victory over Nears had largely been due to luck. Nears' familiarity with the terrain, his tendency to underestimate weaker enemies, and his own arrogance had all caused him to lower his guard and lose his life. Isaac frowned slightly before correcting himself internally. It had not simply been luck. He had seized the opportunity himself. Before Jonas died, he had told Isaac many things, including information about the enemies of House Goethe. Those enemies specialized in dealing with mages, meaning Isaac would never again be fortunate enough to win as easily as he had against Nears. Closing his eyes, Isaac resolved that he had to grow stronger in order to protect House Goethe. Early the next morning, loud noises erupted outside. Hans shouted for the young master, startling Isaac awake as he nervously asked what was happening. The nanny entered the room carrying a basin of water and announced that it was morning, urging him to get up quickly. She then ordered Hans to prepare the young master's clothes, and he immediately obeyed. Still bewildered, Isaac asked why everyone was suddenly behaving that way. The nanny placed the basin down and answered that the master had returned. Hearing those words, Isaac was visibly shaken, and his heart began pounding rapidly. As the sound of horses echoed near the palace gates, Isaac realized in shock that his father had arrived. In the basement room where Isaac had locked himself away for so many years, the walls had become covered in tally marks so that he could keep track of his age. By then, Isaac had become a frail old man, and he sat quietly at his desk while the scratching sound of his pen echoed through the silent room. When Arthur entered, Isaac looked up in surprise and asked whether it was truly his father. Arthur widened his eyes in shock, stood frozen in place as the bag slipped from his shoulder onto the floor, and questioned whether the man before him was really Isaac. After countless years of separation and longing, the two of them had finally reunited. Locks of hair drifted onto the floor, while the sound of scissors echoed softly through the silence. Arthur gently told Isaac that it would not hurt if he wished to go through with it. Isaac remained silent, only slightly furrowing his brows before quietly shaking his head. Arthur asked if this was truly what Isaac wanted, and Isaac confirmed that it was. Arthur then kissed Isaac lightly on the forehead and declared that this would be the last time their paths would cross. As he reluctantly turned to leave, he told Isaac that he would wait for him and that, when Isaac finally found him again, he should cast aside all his regrets. Back in the present, sunlight poured into the book-filled room. Isaac remarked that it was the first time he had seen his father since then. Holding several documents in his hand, Arthur mentioned that he had heard Isaac cured the children in Black Goose Village and asked whether the rumor was true. Isaac curiously asked whether Schiller had been the one to tell him. Arthur nodded and admitted that, at first, he thought he had misheard. Nervously, Isaac explained that he had merely been lucky because he happened to read about a strange case of pneumonia whose symptoms matched those suffered by the village children. Arthur repeatedly tapped his fingernails against the desk before asking about Isaac's health lately. Isaac was caught off guard and thought that his father was strangely letting the matter slide. He admitted that he was not completely certain, though he had not experienced any more explosions. Arthur appeared relieved and commented that the doctor they had brought from Othon must truly be as talented as people claimed. He then urged Isaac to drink the potion, insisting that it would make him feel better. Isaac responded with some discomfort, saying that, despite everything, the doctor had not actually helped much. Under the blazing sunlight streaming into the room, the father and son silently stared at one another until Isaac finally broke the silence by asking how things were at the frontier fortress of Winterband. Arthur looked surprised and questioned why Isaac was suddenly curious about it. Isaac awkwardly explained that, as a member of the Goethe family, he would eventually have to go there himself one day. Arthur answered that the place was much the same as always, filled with monsters, knights, and endless snow. However, he added that there had been one unusual matter during their return journey after they stopped by Burn City to restock supplies. Hearing this, Isaac silently thought about Burn City, while Arthur continued by describing a rather disturbing incident that had occurred there. Isaac immediately asked what had happened. Arthur explained that a soldier had attacked a company commander. Shocked, Isaac assumed the soldier must already have been executed. Arthur stroked his chin and explained that, surprisingly, the victim himself had requested a court-martial instead. Isaac could not understand the reason behind such a decision and questioned why the commander would do that. At that moment, the study door opened and Fickle hurried inside, apologizing for the interruption before cheerfully greeting young Master Isaac and remarking on how much he had grown. Randolph politely greeted Isaac as well. The instant Isaac saw Randolph, his eyes widened in astonishment, while Randolph himself could not understand why Isaac was staring at him in such a strange way. Arthur invited Fickle and Randolph to come in before telling Isaac that he could leave now. Startled, Isaac obediently acknowledged his father and quickly exited the study. As Isaac walked away, he could still hear Fickle insisting that the court-martial should be held as soon as possible so that the bastard could be executed to set an example and maintain discipline. Arthur frowned and questioned why Fickle seemed so impatient. Fickle immediately replied that the matter concerned discipline itself. Arthur then turned to Randolph and asked whether he agreed. Randolph responded sternly that he merely followed the orders of his superiors. Arthur sighed heavily and questioned how Randolph could say such a thing after having his ear cut off. Isaac hurried through the quiet hallway while his thoughts lingered on the crest of his family. He reflected that the Goethe emblem was emblazoned upon their cloaks as the shield of the kingdom. He realized that the two men were knights from the frontier fortress of Winterband and concluded that Randolph must be the victim involved in the mutiny. Bill soon came running after him, panting heavily as he called out to the young master. He explained that he had been searching everywhere for Isaac and urgently begged him to come along because the matter was important. After the two of them reached a secluded area, Isaac curiously asked what was wrong after seeing how terrified Bill appeared. Bill coughed awkwardly and revealed that he had heard something from one of Nier's men regarding the slave trade in the sewers. Isaac asked what about it. Bill explained his suspicion that certain people had been accepting bribes in exchange for looking the other way. Isaac abruptly stopped walking and demanded to know who those people were. Sweating nervously, Bill answered that they were knights from Winterband. He then added that, not long ago, one of Nier's men, or rather, one of their own men, had been found dead near the sewer entrance. The strange part, according to Bill, was that every finger except the pinky had been cut off. Isaac listened seriously and asked what happened next. Bill nervously searched through his pocket before explaining that, when he woke up that morning, those severed fingers had been lying right beside him. He further revealed that a warning had been delivered through one of his men stating that, if he did not have everything prepared within 2 days, his own fingers would be next. Terrified pale, Bill pleaded for Isaac to do something and argued that Isaac himself had placed him in this position. Isaac lowered his head and asked whether there had been any witnesses regarding the bodies. Bill scratched his ear and explained that there had been one witness, though everything had happened far too quickly. According to the story, a glowing sword suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and the entire incident ended almost instantly. Bill added that the only distinguishing trait of the culprit was that his head had been wrapped in bandages. Isaac's brows tightened further as he finally stated that he understood the situation. Bill stared blankly and questioned whether that was all Isaac intended to say. Isaac slowly resumed walking and calmly assured him that he was not going to die. Isaac reasoned that, during Arthur's return journey, the two knights who had requested the court-martial had stopped in Burn City, entered the sewers, and killed those bandits in order to make an example out of them. He pointed out that the description matched perfectly. Grinding his teeth in anger, Isaac declared that, if this was truly the case, then those Winterband knights were not the shield of the kingdom, but rather a disease that needed to be eradicated. Later, when Isaac appeared at the dungeon, the guard looked extremely surprised and asked what had brought the young master there. Isaac inquired whether there was a death row convict imprisoned there for mutiny and declared that he wanted to see him. Inside the cell, Kyle sat silently while a cold glint flickered within his eyes, enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Isaac explained that the reason he had sought out a death row prisoner was to confirm one thing: whether the Knights of Winterband were truly connected to Nier's. Coincidentally, that prisoner was the very man who had committed an act of insubordination against them, so Isaac believed he might know something. Standing before the prison cell, Isaac questioned the prisoner by asking whether he knew an organization called Nier's, adding that he had heard they were involved in human trafficking. Kyle let his shackled hands hang loosely before raising his head and pressing his lips together without saying a word. Isaac suddenly realized that the man looked familiar. He continued interrogating him by asking whether he knew anything about the connection between the sewer and his company commander. Kyle remained completely silent. After standing up and walking forward, he declared that he would only say it once. Suddenly grabbing the iron bars, Kyle widened his eyes and insisted that he did not know anything. Isaac fell into a brief daze for several seconds. Kyle froze when Isaac hesitated before asking whether his name was Kyle. Isaac then stated that he remembered now and questioned whether Kyle's only answer was going to be a lie. Panic immediately spread across Kyle's face as a bead of sweat rolled down his cheek. He staggered backward while his trembling voice asked how Isaac knew that name. Isaac recalled that the first time he had learned the name Kyle was during the escalation of the kingdom's civil war. The conflict had begun with the succession ceremony for the throne. The second prince, who had lost the War of Succession, betrayed the kingdom, sided with the empire, and caused a massacre during the ceremony. After the kingdom was subjugated by the empire, the people gathered together and started a rebellion, which soon developed into a civil war. The leader of the rebel army had been Kyle, who at the time had tried to go by the name Carlson. Kyle stared in confusion and asked how Isaac knew that. Isaac remembered reading about it in a book called Chronicles of Villains, a popular work that illustrated the stories and portraits of several famous villains. Among all the chapters, the one featuring Kyle had been especially popular. The image of Kyle surrounded by a radiant aura surfaced in Isaac's mind. Isaac reflected that the most interesting thing in the book had been the assessment that Kyle was a genius destined to become the continent's seventh swordmaster. Seeing him in person now, Isaac could not help but agree. Kyle possessed astonishing mana, and Isaac could not even imagine how much effort he must have put in to reach this point, nor how powerful he would become once his talent fully blossomed. Isaac also remembered that, in his previous life, such a talented man had escaped right before his execution and later become the leader of the rebel army. Meanwhile, Kyle shouted for Isaac to answer him and demanded to know how he knew all of that. Isaac calmly replied that it was still too early for Kyle to be surprised because he also knew that Kyle was the son of Cation. Those words shocked Kyle even more. Filled with curiosity, he asked who Isaac really was. Isaac continued revealing the information he knew, asking how someone who served in Winterband could fail to recognize the eldest son of House Goethe. Kyle shouted that that was not what he was asking. He demanded to know how Isaac had learned those things and asked whether Isaac had come there to kill him. Isaac remarked that Kyle was far too self-conscious and questioned why he would care about the son of a mercenary from the neighboring republic, especially a bastard who had disappeared over a decade ago. Kyle became suspicious and asked whether Isaac truly was young Master Isaac. Isaac answered indifferently that he did not care whether Kyle believed him or not because there was only one thing he wanted to know: why the company commanders of Winterband were involved in the slave trade. Under the dim candlelight, Kyle's voice echoed throughout the room as he replied that if Isaac truly was the young master, then that was even more reason for him to answer. Isaac crossed his arms thoughtfully and pointed out that the company commanders might pin all the crimes related to Niers on Kyle. He warned that Kyle would become a wanted criminal throughout the kingdom and would not even be able to begin his revenge. Kyle slowly brought his hands together, his face darkening as hesitation filled his heart. Isaac could only remain silent and wait. Not long afterward, Isaac sighed inwardly and admitted to himself that Kyle was not someone he could manipulate as easily as Bill. Turning away, Isaac told himself that, in that case, he had no choice but to draw them out personally. The scene then shifted to a tunnel where droplets of water echoed as they hit the ground. Two men dressed in black entered the passageway. Fickle found the situation strange and remarked that there was no sign of Niers' men. Suddenly, Randolph pointed ahead and told him to look. He observed that the cages meant to hold the merchandise were completely empty. Another man commented that Niers had suddenly stopped sharing the kickbacks and had even told them to come find him if they had a problem. He wondered whether the new Niers was planning to call everything off. In an instant, both men stopped moving. Fickle immediately grabbed the hilt of his sword defensively. At that moment, Bill forced a trembling smile onto his face and invited them to come inside. Sweat poured down his body as he pointed toward the door with his open palm. One of the men questioned whether Bill was one of Niers' subordinates. He found it suspicious that Bill was dressed like a servant and noted that he did not appear to be carrying any weapons. Fickle quickly turned toward Randolph and nodded as a signal. Afterward, the two men entered the room together. The moment they stepped inside, one of them flinched in shock and froze on the spot. Sitting beneath the dim candlelight, already waiting for them, was Isaac. Fickle grinned and asked whether Isaac was the new boss of Niers. He mockingly remarked that Isaac must have 9 lives to summon them without even offering a proper greeting. Isaac kept his arms crossed while his expression darkened. The killing intent in his voice caused the two men to become uneasy as he calmly asked whether he could ask them one thing. As he watched Isaac slowly stand up, Fickle wondered in confusion whether that was the voice of a child. Isaac slowly walked forward and demanded to know why they had done it. Randolph seemed to realize something at that moment and became utterly horrified. To the amazement of his companion, he immediately dropped to his knees. The other man stared at him in confusion and demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Randolph shouted for him to kneel as well and asked whether he truly did not know who that person was. Isaac continued approaching them before greeting them pleasantly and suggesting that they sit down for a cup of tea. He then addressed them directly as Sir Fickle and Sir Randolph. A trembling voice echoed through the room afterward as someone muttered in disbelief that the person before them was young Master Isaac. In the dark forest, a small house stood half hidden amid the swirling white snow. Fickle held a heavy bag of money in his hands and exclaimed in amazement that it was an incredible amount of money. He remarked that that piece of trash, Nears, really had a knack for making money. Randolph picked up a shining gold coin and observed that with that money, they would have enough food and firewood for the month. Overjoyed, Fickle began calculating what they could do with the money. He pointed out that it was not all they could afford, adding that they could replace their rusty swords and even have some spending money left over. He then handed Randolph his share. At that moment, the figure of a man appeared outside. Kyle quickly entered the house and ordered them to stop. He demanded to know what that conversation had been about and questioned what exactly they were doing with the money. After hearing their story, Isaac stated that he finally understood what had happened. He acknowledged that they had their reasons as well. He explained that his father was an upright man but lacked resourcefulness and flexibility. According to Isaac, his father was nothing more and nothing less than the shield protecting the North. He continued by saying that they respected him for that, but at the same time they could not simply stand by and watch soldiers die. Therefore, having no other choice, they had extorted money from bandits to cover supply shortages for his father and for Goethe. Fickle nodded repeatedly and eagerly confirmed that Isaac's understanding was completely correct. Isaac folded his arms and announced that he would now deliver his verdict. He declared that Fickle and Randolph were sentenced to death. Both men froze in shock upon hearing the judgment. They stammered in disbelief at the mention of the death penalty. Isaac replied sternly that his father's judgment would not have been any different. He explained that they would be sent before a military tribunal. Fickle immediately sprang to his feet and slammed his hand against the table. He shouted that even after hearing their story, Isaac still did not understand. He argued that Isaac could never know what true hunger felt like. He asked whether Isaac had ever suffered frostbite so severe that his hands and feet had to be amputated, or whether he had ever watched comrades die horrific deaths because the edge of his sword had been too dull. Isaac shook his head and admitted that he had not. However, he remarked that Fickle certainly had no shortage of excuses. He then asked why Fickle had not explained the reason behind the kidnapping of civilians. Startled, Fickle quickly insisted that it had been Nears' doing alone and that Nears had acted without their involvement. Hearing this, Isaac fell silent for a moment before asking whether Fickle was claiming that he had never crossed the line in the way Nears had. Fickle widened his eyes in astonishment. He bitterly remarked that he should never have expected a brat like Isaac to understand. Turning toward Randolph, he demanded to know how long Randolph intended to sit there. He ordered him to get up and reminded him that they were the swords of Goethe. He proclaimed that if it was for the sake of protecting Goethe, he was prepared to cut down anything. Randolph stared at him in disbelief and asked whether he was serious. Fickle loudly urged him to think carefully. He argued that His Excellency still had young Master Jonas and claimed that it would be better to get rid of a ticking time bomb like Isaac. Isaac merely watched him in silence. A pale blue aura wrapped itself around Fickle's sword as mana flowed throughout his body. Isaac appeared both surprised and intrigued. He remarked with interest that Fickle intended to use his aura. Still unable to believe what was happening, Randolph muttered Fickle's name and questioned how things had come to this. He admitted that in the beginning it had definitely been for Goethe. However, he wondered whether what they were doing now was truly for Goethe anymore. Lowering his head and pressing his lips together, Randolph recalled something Fickle had once said, that if Fickle was the sword, then Randolph was the shield. He then recounted Carlson's words, namely that a sword capable of cutting through anything without breaking was a masterpiece, but once such a masterpiece gained a will of its own, it became a demonic sword. The moment Randolph drew his sword, Fickle froze and demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Randolph stomped onto the tea table, sending water splashing everywhere. Their swords collided violently, scattering sparks. Trembling from exertion, Randolph declared that he had only realized the truth after losing his ear and that Carlson had been right all along. Fickle's eyes widened in terror and his face turned pale. He shouted that Randolph had lost his mind and warned that he would be executed. Pressing his sword down harder, Randolph replied that such a fate would simply be part of their karma. He then confronted Fickle directly, stating that the money had not been used solely for the territory. Randolph lunged forward. Fickle failed to block the strike. Blood splattered across the floor. Later, Fickle's body was placed inside a sack, with blood dripping steadily onto the ground. Isaac then remarked that this explained why Carlson had drawn his sword. Randolph lowered his head and confessed that when Carlson had discovered the truth, they had initially intended to silence him. He admitted that they had planned at least to injure him. Isaac looked at him seriously and concluded that they had ultimately lost to Carlson. Randolph acknowledged this and explained that Carlson could easily have killed them. Instead, Carlson had merely told him to open his ears to the truth, cut off his ear, and then allowed himself to be arrested without resistance. Isaac asked whether Randolph had stopped Carlson's summary execution because of guilt. Randolph remained silent and offered no answer. Feeling dizzy and terrified, Randolph finally asked what would happen to his family if everything became public. Isaac's expression remained cold as he replied that Randolph likely knew the answer better than anyone. Randolph fell silent, his brows furrowing slightly. Sensing the tension in the room, Bill quietly edged toward a corner. He muttered to himself that something else seemed about to go wrong and wondered whether he should run away while he still had the chance. Isaac remained silent for a moment. Then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Addressing Randolph formally, he asked whether Randolph had any intention of paying for his sins through alternative means. Isaac asked Sir Randolph whether he had any intention of paying for his sins through alternative means. Upon hearing the question, Randolph froze. It was then explained that the story had been rewritten. Randolph and Fickle had originally cooperated in trading with Nears in order to replenish their company's supplies. However, driven by greed, Fickle had taken the lead in slave trading and even gone so far as to lay hands on the maids of the estate. When that failed, he attempted to sell Isaac off to a foreign country. It was further revealed that the one who ultimately stopped him had been Randolph, the loyal knight. In the end, all of the sins had been pinned on Fickle alone. Under the scorching sun of the central square, Fickle's head had been displayed on a tall pillar as a warning, meant to deter those involved in the trafficking of women. Randolph, witnessing the fate of his former companion, was overwhelmed by a mixture of guilt and sorrow. Without saying a word, he quietly departed. Meanwhile, under the glow of burning firelight, Isaac sat drinking tea with Arthur. Isaac observed that even if the two company commanders had been corrupted by greed, the root cause of their desperation remained undeniably real, a severe lack of supplies. He explained that House Goethe, which defended the northern borders on behalf of the royal family, was compensated through an annual shield tax, which served as its primary income. However, this tax had been steadily decreasing. He added that House Goethe could not voice complaints or attempt to accumulate wealth because of the mad mage from their lineage, Ziek von Goethe, who had once reduced the royal capital to ashes. When no one in the kingdom could stop him, the king had bowed to the emperor, and Ziek von Goethe had been executed by the imperial knights. After that incident, the kingdom had become a vassal state of the empire. Although House Goethe had been spared execution due to the king's mercy, it had been stripped of its ducal status, reduced to a mere county, and exiled to barren northern lands. Isaac further reasoned that any attempt to accumulate wealth would be interpreted by the royal family as treason. Therefore, maintaining the current system despite its limited budget was the safest option, though he also considered that this assumption might simply be incorrect. Arthur was visibly startled by Isaac's implication that the royal family might leave them alone if they attempted to build up wealth. Isaac then continued by pointing out that the royal family's finances were deteriorating year by year, and the shield tax would likely continue to decrease. In such a situation, he questioned whether House Goethe becoming self-reliant and refusing the shield tax would be perceived as suspicious or, instead, as a relief to the crown. He concluded that the real issue was not that they were forbidden from building wealth, but that they simply had not discovered how to do so, as they were trapped on barren land and surrounded by hostile forces. After hearing this, Arthur became silent and contemplative. He acknowledged that Isaac's point had merit, but insisted that a concrete solution would be required for any of it to matter. He asked whether Isaac could actually provide such a solution. Isaac remained silent, though his determination was clearly visible in his eyes. He then stated that they must begin by severing ties with the old church, arguing that as long as they remained bound by its doctrines of asceticism, House Goethe would never be able to cultivate wealth. Arthur frowned at the suggestion and warned that if they broke away from the old church, the Vatican would not remain passive. Isaac tightened his fist, veins standing out on his hand, and responded that this was precisely why they needed a justification, and that he already had a way to create one. Arthur then turned to Schiller and asked what he thought, wondering whether the plan could truly have originated from Isaac himself. He remarked that it was astonishing, given that Isaac had never even received proper tutoring due to his mana explosions. Arthur then stood up and walked to the window, gazing down at Isaac in the courtyard while repeating the idea of severing ties with the old church in his mind. He placed his hand on the glass and tapped it repeatedly in thought. Schiller observed Arthur's reaction and simply smiled faintly. The ticking sound echoed through the quiet room as evening deepened outside, with a light wind carrying fallen leaves and the distant clatter of a carriage passing through the night. A few days later, south of Burn City, a carriage arrived at a house and came to a stop. A man completely cloaked was waiting at the entrance. He spoke a coded phrase, stating that one should kiss the entrails of the black calf, and after a pause, Bill correctly recited the continuation, that joy would toy with you. Confirming the code, Gray nodded in satisfaction and instructed them to bring forth the gift. Isaac, bound at the hands and gagged, was then taken down from the carriage. Gray questioned whether the boy was truly the promised sacrifice, while Bill scolded him for not recognizing the target despite having assigned the job. Gray insisted on verifying the identity on their side as well, especially if they were to deliver the promised reward. After seeing Isaac's face clearly, Gray expressed satisfaction and declared that the promised sacrifice had indeed arrived, instructing them to bring in the true gift and addressing his servant, claiming that the goddess of fire would accept it gladly. The door was opened and Mary slowly entered. Gray stated that, as the goddess willed, she should follow him. After the two had entered, Bill finally relaxed, admitting that the situation and the people involved disgusted him, before urgently urging that they should leave. It was then revealed that they had constructed a perfect act to deceive their targets, ensuring that Gray and Mary remained completely unaware that those involved in Isaac's kidnapping were, in fact, his own allies.